you learn and you grow on every project that you do. What's interesting is when you have a film that becomes a success overnight, it actually, you're not any different of a cinematographer than you were before that film. You just had the fortune of, the world getting to see a little bit of what you can do. I think there's this idea that, that you've changed and really, it's more that everyone else's perception of you has changed, or that they at least know you exist. But I feel like, it's all a growth process, and that every project you do informs, something. And certain things, you might love one way of lighting for a while, and then you get a little sick of it and you try something else, and maybe you come back to it later. It's an evolution, and it's also, art is subjective, so there's no right or wrong. You kind of just evolve and you try new things, and yeah, you make some mistakes that you never make again, and you have some great fortunes that you try to recreate. I think again it comes to perception, and there's this idea that because the cameras are smaller, suddenly women can shoot. And I don't think I just speak for myself. I mean, I've been shooting for a while now, and I'll shoot with a Airy Cam and a 1,000-foot mag. I think as long as the camera is well balanced, the weight is completely irrelevant, and I'd actually much prefer a heavier camera that's got some good ergonomics to it than some of the smaller cameras. And maybe perception is important, because maybe that does change the way other women perceive their own abilities. But for me, weight is a complete non-issue. And maybe, I suppose if it means that a producer thinks that, women can shoot now, then great. But I really don't think the size of the cameras or the weight of the cameras should have anything to do with it. As far as women cinematographers, my hope is that people will start looking at us as just cinematographers. I look at myself that way. I'm a DP. I happen to be a woman. But I think the day people stop sort of, wanting to talk about being a female DP is when we've actually changed. And so for me, it's important to try to, get people to look at me just as a DP and not as a woman DP. Sound of My Voice is a very small film, which actually started as a web series, or the concept of it started as a web series. And it was something that I was involved with Zal and Britt in sort of developing and conceptualizing. And I think the idea was that there would be, a dichotomy between the outside world and this, interior occult, and feeling, the feeling of claustrophobia versus the feeling of sort of, liberty and freedom. And, and then as it takes on a bit more of a psychological sort of the feeling of always being watched. So introducing longer lenses through foreground to kind of, what's real, what's not, and, what's in somebody's head and what's in actuality, and what's dangerous and what's harmless. So that was sort of the idea behind it. Fruitvale is it's a really interesting scenario for a cinematographer, because you have tons of films that are based on true stories, but very few that are based on true stories that happened 3 years ago in locations that still exist exactly as they were. So it's not this interpretation of something. It was really important to be very, very authentic. And those were the dialogues, with the director, who is just, an incredible, incredible person. Was kind of where authenticity was really was paramount to him. I would have to sort of at times audition the idea of a little bit of cinematic gravitas, just to, at the same time, it's not a documentary. So what's the difference between, a very true to life narrative film versus a documentary? And we'd have, to me, very fascinating conversations about where we could take slight creative liberties. For instance, in the BART station, the fluorescent lights up above they're warm white, which is sort of a yellow, warm feeling to them. And it's this, terrible, terrible event. And for me, I always, the second I saw them, I'm like, well, we're going to time it cool, right? And then we got into this dialogue about, will it still feel like the BART station if we time it to feel a little cooler instead of being warm? Because, Ryan really wanted, it to anybody who'd ever been on that train, or anybody who'd ever been on that station, to really resonate and know that they were there. And that was the dialogue, which is so interesting. It's not something that comes up in most films. I think are much less sort of you know, less, you know, beat for beat, authentic interpretations of things. That's the first question for any, you know, for any narrative is, you know, what's the best way to tell this story, and how do you do justice to, you know, the material on the page? And then yeah, I mean, I guess by borders you're sort of saying parameters. You sort of conceive of, you know, well, what are the emotional beats, and you know, is this film, are we going to better serve this film by being handheld? Are we going to better serve this film by being fluid? And you make those choices for yourself. And, you know, and it doesn't have to be, you know, I think one of the things that I see happening recently, which is great, is that instead of sort of being, oh, this film is all handheld and this film is all, you know, set, that it can change scene to scene. I mean, it's not even just necessarily what are the parameters for a film as a whole, but what are the parameters for each scene, and you know, whose story. I mean, I just did a film that was an ensemble piece, and so it was kind of like, all right, if you know, if we had to rank the order in this scene, is it this character's story or this character's story? And is, you know, in this scene, whose story is it? And you know, it's sort of, those questions change from, sometimes even from shot to shot. I love it all. I really, this is it for me. This is all I've ever wanted to do. I love not going to an office every day. I love shooting on locations. I love telling stories. I love, you know, collaborating. I love the visuals, obviously. Yeah, I love my job.